Welcome everyone. For those that haven't met me before, as Claudia said, I'm Sam. So I head up the sales team for Rosterfy in the UK. Really excited to have Tuesday with us today. They're a very special charity and a really special volunteer program that ties together the charity and the volunteer workforce really well. I think they've had several people who have volunteered with the charity who have gone on to support the organisation as employees, Tuesday being one of them. So really excited to hear Tuesday's story today and run through some scenarios of some of the challenges that they face and some of the ways that they connect their community of volunteers, because it's a really special program that they run. As I do all of these sessions, forgive me if you've come to some of these webinars before, I do have to do a quick introduction as to who Rosterfy are, so I'll keep this quite brief. Rosterfy have been in the market for about nine years or so. We're now a leading provider in the volunteer management software space. We have volunteer programs in 35 countries with 100 million volunteering hours recently surpassed on our platform, which we're very proud of, but we're also looking for the future and trying to grow that number as much as possible. The UK charity space is our biggest market, headquartered out of London Bridge here, so that's where we support all of our UK-based and European-based customers. You can see on this slide, we've just got a really wide mix of fantastic programs across wonderful not-for-profits of all shapes and sizes, but also city programs as well in the city council space, and supporting some of the largest events as well, both in the music and arts space, but also the sporting arena too. So a real wide mix of different ways for volunteers to get involved with programs supported on Rosterfy, and there's not a lot that we haven't seen when it comes to volunteer management requirements. So for today's session, it's, as the title suggests, we're going to be focusing specifically on the screening aspect of volunteers. So that's quite a challenge for a lot of organisations. So if you followed this sort of webinar series that we're running to date, we've done a session around how do we engage demographics and how do we target different types of people with different messaging to encourage more sign-ups to your program. This is talking about now, once we've had people that have expressed an interest in your program, how can we make that volunteer experience as nice as possible when it comes to screening and onboarding those volunteers? So obviously it's very, very important. These screening steps are things that can't be missed. So quite often we see programs that need to have volunteer forms completed, they need to have potentially waiver forms signed, training modules done, background checks, reference checks. All of those things are quite cumbersome. It's very difficult to try and scale and increase the size of a volunteer program when quite often the volunteer teams themselves that are managing those processes are quite small. So it's really, really difficult to make sure that volunteers have done all of these necessary steps, have been supported throughout that sign-up journey, whilst you've got quite a lean team that's having to chase up the volunteers to do these individual screening steps that are so important. So what we look to do with our customers is try and create a process and an experience for the volunteer where we're getting the volunteer through a really guided and easy to digest onboarding process. We're getting them through those screening steps as quickly and easily as possible so that we're minimizing risk. We're ensuring that we're not buddying people up or scheduling volunteers that haven't done those important screening steps. And at the same time, because we are making it that bit quicker, that bit easier, we're hopefully getting less dropout and more people going through to actively volunteering with our program, which is ultimately the aim of this. So that fits in really well with Tuesday and her program. So I will pass over now to Tuesday to talk a little bit about who pregnancy sickness are. So Tuesday, if you wouldn't mind starting and just kind of explaining your background and how you got involved with the charity, I think that would be great for people to hear.
Of course, thanks so much for having me today. It's a real pleasure to be here. So in short, Pregnancy Sickness Support are the only UK charity who help support women and birthing people who are suffering with extreme pregnancy sickness and nausea in pregnancy, which we shorten to NVP, but also the condition of hyperemesis gravidarum, which we shorten to HG. It's a life-threatening condition. It's something that only occurs within pregnancy, and although we are still looking at the statistics, the numbers of those that suffer it is not very high, but it's still a really underdiagnosed condition. And I think some of the reason for that is because sickness is normally so welcomed within pregnancy, so it's really hard for those that are suffering with the severe end of that to be taken seriously by healthcare professionals, because as I said, normally sickness it's so closely linked to pregnancy. So as I said, it is a life it can be really, really hard, and there are some people who will go on to terminate their pregnancies because of the condition of HG, and how difficult it is for them. It can cause severe dehydration and malnutrition, and it can unfortunately have a really big impact on people's mental health as well. I won't delve too much into it, but unfortunately, if you have been someone that follows our charity, you may have heard of Jess and baby Elsie. Jess was suffering with HG, and unfortunately, due to her being told that she shouldn't be on the anti-sickness medication that she was on whilst pregnant, her mental health declined, and she did end up taking her own life. So again, it's such an important thing that we do in reaching those that are suffering with the condition. So I suffered with HG with my youngest. He is now 6. I was really, really unwell. I was hospitalised. I was on many anti-sickness medications. I considered termination. It was a really, really difficult time. Unfortunately, I didn't find out about pregnancy sickness support until just after I had him. But as soon as I found out about them and what they do, I knew it was something that I wanted to get involved with. So I did volunteer for them. I volunteered for 3 years. And, it was one of the best things I've ever done, one of the best decisions I ever made. I'm forever thankful to PSS for giving me the opportunity to move forward and kind of become a member of staff within the team, which I have just hit my 3-year anniversary of that as well. So I have been involved with PSS for 6 years as a whole, and I envision that it will still be quite a long future going forward, because it's obviously something that's so close to my heart. But yeah, we have people say a lot that their babies may not have arrived here if it wasn't for the support that we offer the women in birth and people that we help. So it's a great honour, and it's something that's a great thing to be a part of.
Excellent. What a story. I didn't even know half of that until this week. So it's good to sort of revisit this, because me and Tuesday, when did we first speak? Was it a year ago?
Ooh, yeah, just over, I believe.
Just over a year ago. And at the time, obviously, I think you had a new CEO in place. There was quite an exciting time for the charity. I know that some of the volunteers were going into full-time positions in fundraising and volunteering. So, and I just remember there's a couple of things that I find really, really special about this program. Obviously, one is the volunteers flow into the charity, but also it's a real nice round circle. As you said, it's people that have been impacted who are then coming back to give back and support people who are currently suffering, which is so special and so important. So do you want to just talk a little bit about, I guess, the reason that me and you first started speaking, Tuesday, and where you were at that time, and yeah, kind of what that journey's been like since?
So as I said, I was a volunteer for 3 years before I moved into the role of volunteer manager. And one thing that was really quite apparent to me was the processes that volunteers were having to go through to kind of become a volunteer for PSS. Now, one thing I will say is it's such a small charity, so there was such a small team behind the scenes that, it was understandable that it was quite a clunky way of, kind of getting volunteers in the door and fully trained. So that was one thing I really wanted to focus on when I stepped into the role. And it did take quite some time. But, one thing, when I kind of worked on what was behind the scenes with regards to the onboarding process and the training, it was quite apparent that we needed something that could embrace all of the changes we had made and keep it kind of on one platform. Because the one thing I noticed was I had parts of my process were across so many different platforms that it just wasn't streamlined, and so much of my time was being taken up with the onboarding process that I then wasn't able to spend time, kind of rewarding our volunteers and, kind of maintaining our volunteers, which for me was so important. So we really needed a platform that could do all of that for me, essentially. Hence, we did do some research and opted to go with Rosterfy, which has been an absolute game changer with regards to my role and what I do within the charity. As I said, so much of my time was taken up with the onboarding process, which include, we have to have 2 references for every volunteer. There needs to be interviews, and so much of my time was spent sending emails, chasing up back and forth, and I just didn't have time to do anything else. So Rosterfy has really, really helped with that. It saves me countless hours weekly, easily up to like 15 hours a week. It is saving me from that onboarding process, and it just means that time for me is better spent, as I said, rewarding our volunteers and maintaining them for the incredible work that they do. It also means that I'm now more available for our volunteers. So, our volunteers are supporting people through some of the most traumatic times of their lives. So it's really tough to carry around other people's trauma. But because I'm now more available, because I've got more time, they can book in calls with me, they can debrief, they can offload. So it just all round has helped me get back the hours which I feel are really important to do what I need to do with our volunteers.
Yeah, it makes so much sense. And that's something we see. I obviously go to a lot of these charity sort of conferences and events and these networks. And one of the big topics that's come out in the last couple of years is volunteer burnout. And it is, a lot of these charities are doing such important work and supporting vulnerable people, and that carries such a mental toll, on the volunteers who are at the front of it all and supporting individual people and seeing things that are going on. So that kind of, the peer support and you being there is available, and someone that can, chat and debrief and digest things that they've seen and experienced, I think is so important. When you were saying about, and putting you on the spot a little bit here because I'm not sure exactly how you're doing it yourselves, but when you were saying about rewarding volunteers, what kind of ideas are you using at the moment to try and do that?
So one of my babies that I set up within pregnancy sickness support is our award system that we have for our volunteers. So when a new volunteer comes on board with us and has completed all their training, they have a check sheet for want of a better phrase, and they will list all of the available rewards that they're able to get when they hit certain milestones within the charity. So, for example, some of those milestones will be so every new volunteer is signed up with a mentor when they come on board. So, once they're signed off from their mentor for solo support, once they have reached their 6-month mark, once they have reached 5 supports, 10 supports. But I think the one that tends to stand out the most is when they receive a baby picture from someone they're supporting. They also get a certificate for that. And I think that's a really special time for our volunteers because, as I stated earlier, there are a lot of people that come through to us and they do state that their baby wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the support that they received from our volunteers. So receiving that baby picture and then receiving a certificate for that, I think is a really special moment for our volunteers.
Yeah, that's one of the things I remember from our first conversation when you said it. I was like, wow, how amazing is that? There's no better volunteer reward than that ultimately, is there, in terms of the impact that they're having. I guess, do you want to just talk a little bit about, so we've got on one of the things that I noticed with looking at your kind of portal and looking at the mobile app that you're now using with your volunteers, there's a lot of training, which is obviously understandable. You're putting people into peer-to-peer support. They need to be set up for success to have those conversations. Do you want to just talk a little bit about what that looks like and how that's changed?
Of course, yeah, definitely. So, as I said, when I came on board as a volunteer, the training that I did as a volunteer was just as extensive, but it was all written text, and it was all there was a lot of medical language in there that I didn't understand, and there was a lot of information to take on board, which, as many of you may know, once you've kind of read something, it may go straight out of your head, which, if I'm honest, was what the training had done for me. So again, that was something I really wanted to focus on when I came on board, was just kind of breaking that training down. And, you know, as you said, Sam, it's still so important that they have that training, but it was breaking it down into more manageable chunks. And I've done that. So we now have bite-sized videos. The longest training video we have is half an hour, and all the others are shorter than that. And we also have really handy resources and visuals that will help peer supporters as they kind of move forward with their journey. The great thing about the Rosterfy platform is that even once you've completed your training, they can go back and they can access it at any time. So they don't have to retain that information straight, you know, from the start. If there's ever anything they're unsure of, they can go back there. You know, there's a handy checkpoint on the system where they can go in and they can look at all the resources, and just kind of give themselves a bit of a refresh, which again I think is something that's really important, which was another reason why I wanted to break it down, so it's not just, they're not just scrolling through lots and lots of kind of written text. They're kind of really good graphics and visuals where they can put up the one that they need, look through it, and then they can carry on with their role. So, and as I said, you know, Rosterfy not only gives our volunteers a place to be able to view them once they've completed their training, but it's also very clear for me as volunteer manager to be able to see who's at what stage of their training. So, you know, our peer support is our main role. We have a couple of other small roles, for example, our HG advocacy role, and they've got different training. So it's just really handy that I can see who's at what stage in their training, which has made all the difference to how we're able to train up our volunteers.
That makes sense. And how, just out of interest, before you were using Rosterfy, how were you tracking the training? I know that it's a bit more manual in terms of reading it, but how are you deciphering? No. Okay.
So because a lot of it was done on the kind of the back end of our website, they would, you know, volunteers would come on, they would read it all through, and then they could just click submit, and then I would just get a notification to say, oh, they've submitted, that they've completed their training, and then we can start the process. But as we all know, we kind of maybe just scroll through and don't necessarily read all the text that is there. So I couldn't screen what was happening, and I couldn't screen you know, kind of how much time they had spent looking at that training. Another, you know, positive with Rosterfy is that after every training module, you can give them a chance to answer a question, so you can see that they kind of watched it already and understood it before they then move on to the next stage. And, you know, you can kind of set it so that they have to get 100% in that answer before they can move on to the next stage. So kind of Rosterfy is taking that out of my hands. I don't have to manually look at what they're doing, because Rosterfy does it all for me.
That makes sense. Yeah, and that's one of the things, I guess, that we preach is when you're looking to make a program more inclusive and find more people and those sorts of things, instead of chasing up every individual person, you've got the visibility, haven't you, of who's at what stage. Some of them will have already gone through the whole process. Some might be stuck and they need more support, but you've got the ability to kind of focus your energy and your time on people that are stuck and need some support, rather than having to chase every individual reference check.
And because of that as well, what I have got set on our platform of Rosterfy is that every Friday I will go through to each checkpoint and I will just send out weekly reminders. So as you said, I can literally just go to everyone that's at that checkpoint and send out an email. I don't have to go to every individual person to send out that reminder. So it just saves so much of my time.
Good stuff. Thank you very much. So I think I've annoyingly changed the order of this presentation because I forgot that we were going to do a poll at the start. So let's just do a poll for the audience quickly, and then we'll take some time to do some questions. So just out of interest, because there's no kind of benchmarks or industry standard in this sector, so just a quick question on what are the main challenges that you're facing with volunteer screenings? There's a few different multiple choice options there. Just be interested to know from the audience what the spread might be. So we'll just give that a couple of minutes. And then once we've had those answers back, what we can do is just allow some time. 20 minutes flies by. I could speak to Tuesday all day about this, but we'll probably have to pause and spend some time answering questions if there are any that come through. So
looks like everyone has answered, and quite an even split, but definitely that manual communication and the administrative burden seems to be the main challenge. So that definitely aligns to what you're speaking about, Tuesday.
Yeah, it's interesting. So legal and compliance kind of comes last in that answer survey, and that just tells me it's obviously something important, but people are having to, as Tuesday was doing, manually check and make sure that those steps are being completed. It's about how do we free you up to be a bit more proactive and support. So yeah, I think Tuesday's there's another slide there that I could summarize around what Rosterfy is doing. Just in terms of this webinar series, we're working through a series here, and we'll get some more customers involved to tell the story. So we talked about awareness and how we get more signups. We're then talking about recruitment and screening and training them through that. Then we'll focus on kind of how we're scheduling and tracking the impact of volunteers and going through to reward and insights and impact. So this is an ongoing series, and we're going to chunk down the full kind of volunteer cycle and journey within this series. Our next webinar that we have coming up is in a couple of weeks' time. That's going to be around storytelling to improve onboarding and retention. So throughout that process of onboarding and screening, how do we keep volunteers engaged? How do we make it really clear what the charity is doing, and keep them engaged and involved in your mission so that they understand the difference that their volunteering hours are making? So, I mean, that certificate story of having a baby photo come through, there's nothing more powerful than that, and that's a real clear one. So yeah, those sorts of things of how do you kind of really articulate to the volunteer the difference that they're making, and that's going to be the focus of our next session, which you're all welcome to join. Mine and Tuesday's details are on this slide, so if you wanted to reach out and ask us any questions, feel free to. We've got about, looking at the timer, about 6 minutes left of this session, so I'm going to pause now and just see if there's any questions for myself or Tuesday from anything that we've covered today. No questions come through as yet. We can obviously keep this chat open, so you've got, if you want to pop us an email after and submit some questions through to us, feel free to. What I would just say is thank you very, very much to Tuesday for coming on. Really, really appreciate your time. It's great to see the impact that the program is having, and I think, interested to know, Tuesday, what's next, I guess, for the charity. What's coming up in the next year or two?
So we've had a lot of change in the last year. As you mentioned earlier, we did have our fabulous new CEO take over last September, and she has done amazing things for the charity. So I have no doubt that will continue. We've managed to get into Parliament, just because the whole women's health thing around pregnancy is not where we need it to be. So, as I stated earlier, because it's such an underdiagnosed condition, there is still so much more work that we need to do. So anytime we have the opportunity to get in front of Parliament or kind of, the women's health strategy, that's exactly what we're going to be doing. So we'll keep striving to do that. Fundraising is always a really big thing that we try and do, because we're a non-government funded charity, and we help so many people, but we're very limited with what we can do. So, fundraising is always one of our top priorities. But also research, we're really hoping to move forward with more research with regards to the condition of HG, and the links that it has to certain genes and, kind of certain outcomes for women and children, and the potential damage that the dehydration and malnutrition can do for mum and baby. So lots to look forward to in the next couple of years.
Yeah, hugely important. And what I know that you've got volunteers. Sorry, Claudia, I can hear myself.
No, I was just going to say we have had a question come through, so I thought a good time to pop in there and maybe throw this one to you, Tuesday, about how have you managed to strike a balance between automation and keeping that personal touch with the volunteers?
Oh, good question. So the good thing with Rosterfy is you may have been able to see, so Rosterfy is very blue, PSS is very pink. So as you can see, you can completely cater it to your own brand, which is great. So that includes the automation part of it. So even though all of the automated emails come from the Rosterfy platform, they are from me, and when someone responds to an email, it comes directly through to me. So that line of communication and that personal touch is still there. I spend a lot of time talking to our volunteers. As I said, I'm kind of very accessible to our volunteers because of the role that they're doing. So I find that balance quite easy to kind of maintain that personal touch with regards to our volunteers. The automation side of it takes out the legwork, so to speak, the bit that kind of took the longest of, especially with regards to the onboarding process. Once the onboarding process is done, for us personally as a charity, that's when it becomes much more personal, and there'll be conversations directly with me rather than through automations on Rosterfy.